At Utah Humanities, we are choosing to experience social distancing as a virtual campfire by staying connected, having conversations, sharing ideas, and just being human together. This conversation is with Josh Wennergren from Utah Humanities, where he talks about our current social distancing and COVID-19 situation within the context of environmental humanities, spirituality, and our place on the planet. We actually had a few technical difficulties, but stick with it because the content is definitely worth your time. So this conversation is with my friend Josh Wennergren from Utah Humanities. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Deena. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for organizing this Campfire series. Digital.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the conversation today.
Absolutely.
So we're going to focus primarily on environmental humanities today. But first of all, why don't you take a minute to describe your role at Utah Humanities and your programs?
Yeah, so I am the director for the Center for Educational Access at Utah Humanities. And so my role is to design, maintain programs that we offer with our partners, with our academic partners, that are their educational courses based in the humanities. So there's two programs that I spend most of my time on, and that's the Clemente course in the humanities and the Venture course in the humanities. And the Clemente is for youth learners, and the Venture is for adult learners. And both the courses are designed for students who are from communities that have been historically underrepresented in higher education. And they're both year-long humanities experiences where we have college professors teach, our history, philosophy, literature, U.S. history, and a lot of kind of more interdisciplinary humanities topics. And we do this with there's kind of two main goals with these programs. And the first one is to provide a space for students to discover, to exercise, and to strengthen their sense of voice and agency within their communities. At Utah Humanities and everywhere, it's clear that the humanities are a really valuable tool to help people kind of unlock some of their agency in the world. And so we facilitate that with these courses. And then the other kind of primary goal with both of these is to help students apply for and succeed in college. And so that means navigating the landscape of higher education, both the kind of like, this is how you apply, this is how you go about looking for financial aid, but also this is how you email a professor, and these are kind of the social components that go in, and this is how you ask questions, and this is how you hold yourself accountable. So so that's the bulk of my work.
And you do such great work, Josh, with in really personal impactful ways with people that benefit from the one-on-one, right? The smaller classes.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess maybe I should I can always go on a rant forever, but I should make sure to mention that so Clemente right now we have at West High and East High in Salt Lake City, and those two courses are offered in partnership with the University of Utah, SLIC, and Westminster College. And then provided that this whole kind of world derailment doesn't throw things off too far, we were hoping to have a course begin at Provo High this fall with Utah Valley University. So all those ducks are in a row. So then it's just kind of making sure that this coronavirus thing can be handled in a way that we can continue on with life as usual.
Definitely, yeah. These courses are life-changing for people, and I just commend your work. It's amazing stuff.
Thank you. I'm excited to have inherited them and get to work on them. So yeah.
Great. So let's talk about environmental humanities. First of all, how do you explain what the environmental humanities are?
Yeah, that's a a common, so I went to the U and did environmental humanities for a master's degree, and that's like a common joke with all of the graduates. It's like, oh man, like how do you explain? Like, I mean, and you know, working in the humanities, it's already kind of hard sometimes to explain to people what the humanities are. So then you add the environmental thing to it, and it's challenging, but not impossible.
Yeah.
So as with everything with the humanities, I think that there's a lot of interpretation, there's a lot of gray area, there's a lot of kind of personal perspective that we all apply to different things. The way that I describe environmental humanities is it's examining and taking into account the environmental situation that the world is in right now. And when I say situation, I mean all of the degradation, you know, climate change, species extinction, you know, loss of biodiversity. Also just it doesn't all have to be negative. It's also just looking at how we fit into the biosphere and how we connect to nature, and what nature, like what is that role that it plays in our society. So it's looking at all of that through the lens of the humanities. So meaning that we're looking at environmental art, we're looking at environmental history, environmental literature. Philosophy has many different components that fit into this environmental question. And so it's the normal humanities with a spin, excuse me, of how does this, how does the environmental question look through that lens? So that's kind of a big way of explaining it. And I guess I should say that going again on kind of my personal view of it, when I studied it up at the U and have kept a pulse on it since then, and really I kind of did it for some of my undergraduate work too, it seems like there's kind of three main, you know, kind of spokes of environmental humanities, and I can kind of roughly categorize them as like, one is very much looking at kind of the conservation, the science, and the policy, and how do we take that information and communicate it and generate support through the humanities. And then kind of along those lines, but a little bit different, is the environmental justice movement. So that basically is acknowledging that with climate change, with pollution, people who are historically marginalized tend to take the brunt of those, you know, problems. And so there's a role for the humanities to play in the environmental justice movement, and communicating it and generating support for it and expressing it. And then so the third kind of like spoke of environmental humanities that I found was this more kind of like spiritual connection to nature and celebrating the wild, and really contemplating how nature affects us and how we affect nature, and you know, how we acknowledge and don't acknowledge the fact that we are a part of, you know, the planet.
Right. You know, I appreciate the kind of the three-spoked model there. It really helps categorize the topic, which could seem a little hard to get your head around, the combination of humanities and environmental issues. So I appreciate that. That was helpful. If we focus on one of those spokes, and you wanted to talk for a little while about, you know, the current situation we are all in with COVID-19 and the social distancing, and it seems like the escalating, you know, tidal wave of issues we are dealing with globally, actually at this point. Which spoke would you want to maybe focus on for a while and kind of position that within our current situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, you know, as I think about those, they really all, of course, overlap and you know, they bleed into each other. But, you know, one thing that maybe I would go to this idea of the kind of the more spiritual side of it, or the connection that we have with nature, or the lack of connection. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about, you know, everything that's going on with this virus and how it is so, it feels like overnight it kind of derailed
Right.
the whole show for the planet, right? At least for the human side of things. And so I think that one thing, maybe I should back up. No, I won't quite introduce that yet. This virus has done something in that it's knocked us all off kind of maybe out of a bubble of security. In a way, it's just a harsh, abrupt, real reminder that that we're animals too, and that we are prone to disease, that there are things that are beyond our control that have a real serious impact in our life. And, it seems to me that so much of the modern world is about not acknowledging those realities. We have air conditioning, we drive our cars, like we do all these things, and I'm not necessarily saying those are bad, but the world of modern conveniences all seem to kind of keep us from this like reality. But then boom, overnight something happens and it pulls us, together in a way, ironically, as we're all isolated. But I think it also really reminds us that that we're in a lot of ways at the mercy of these natural forces which we cannot control despite our efforts.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess I could say one, I have lots I could say on it, and I don't just want to remember, but one kind of interesting point that's been coming up in my mind is that, so something that's talked about a lot, you hear about a lot in environmental humanities circles and beyond, is this idea of what they're calling the Anthropocene. So that is what a lot of scientists and thinkers on this are calling the new epoch of our time. So the Holocene has been characterized for thousands of years before now, I should know the exact date, by a current warming of the planet and a receding of the glacial fields. And they define that moment as kind of the biggest characteristic on the face of the planet, or the most influential force on the planet. And a lot of thinkers have started to say that we've now entered a new epoch called the Anthropocene, which is defined by humans. So that now they're saying that humans are the most powerful, the most influential force on the planet, which is, there's so much that you can think about when you hear that. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, and how in most cases I would agree that we are indeed the most powerful force on the planet right now. You look at how pollution and how climate change has altered so much of the planet, and yet at the same time this disease is really putting us back into check in all sorts of ways. And so it's kind of interesting that these switches of geological times don't happen with a crisp line. There's kind of this transition, and I think this is kind of an example of a transition between it's almost like a power struggle in a weird way.
It's an interesting way of putting it. Tell me more about the power struggle then. I mean, how do you experience that as just one person in the world? How does that position you within this larger context of being very vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, so being vulnerable is a great transition, because for most people know that less than a week ago, so it's Monday today, so last Wednesday, we also had a 5.7 earthquake, and that was my first earthquake. So that combined with this virus, I think it makes me, and it makes everybody, I think, feel a little bit vulnerable. I was talking about kind of popping that bubble of security. And yeah, so I think, I'm losing my train of thought. I hope you can edit some of this a little bit.
Or not, you know what, we're just humans having a conversation. It's just
right,
real,
yeah.
And it's kind of a tough question. I guess I was looking for, when we feel this vulnerable and we recognize our relationship with our environment, for me, it begs a lot of existential questions. I was thinking about this a lot last night. We seem so, sometimes, even with the impact that we are having on the planet, and you can't deny that that human beings creating things are going to have an impact on the environment. On some level, we are truly insignificant when it comes to just the natural, powerful forces that could, decimate us at any moment. I mean, given the earthquake that we experienced here in Utah, we were working as a family about the magnitude that each successive, earthquake threshold would create for us. Meaning, we had a 5.7. What would happen at a 6.7 or a 7.7? You get up to 8 and 9, which apparently hasn't happened for thousands of years, but it would be complete and utter destruction. So, I guess my question was just, when you're looking at your place in the world and with this idea of humanities and the environment, what are your personal thoughts about life and who you are and how to make meaning of a very kind of fragile situation?
That's a great question. So the day after the earthquake, I went for a run up, through City Creek, which is kind of like a mountainous area, kind of a park. And I was struck by, first of all, how many people are outside, because there's not much to do inside. So they're all out enjoying themselves, hopefully keeping a good distance away from everybody. There's a general sense of kind of care that everybody seems to be carrying themselves with. I get a lot of nods and smiles and kind of this recognition that suddenly maybe we're all starting to kind of feel something similar together. And you asked how am I personally responding to it, and my very first thought in that moment when I was running and starting to feel kind of vulnerable was that this virus is not unlike taking a walk up in Yellowstone where there's grizzly bears. It's not unlike that experience that you have when you're amidst a predator, when you're around something that's bigger, and it puts you in perspective, and it's very humbling, and it makes you take stock of what matters. And Lindsay, my wife, and I have had multiple conversations just about how immediately irrelevant so much of the things that we own became, amidst this virus and just the prospect of an earthquake knocking everything over. It's like, so these moments really do kind of shake you into a sense of feeling humble and a sense that we are very interconnected. I kind of touched on that, seeing everybody kind of nod a recognition as you're running along a trail. And I think it also, the closer, the more you're aware of how fragile we are, I think it really puts an emphasis or it highlights the need to really make choices that don't harm others. And so all of those kinds of so what are my actions right now, and how will they affect others, and what can I do to help others, is really starting to kind of come to the surface, amidst this bizarre, everyday, weirder situation.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate you expressing them so articulately and kind of sharing your innermost thinking on some of these topics, because you realize how interdependent we are, and it matters what we do. So
yeah, very much so.
Anything else on environmental humanities that you want to talk about within the context of social distancing and the virus and everything else that we're experiencing right now?
I'm sure it's carrying across that I've had a flood of thoughts, and maybe they're not fully organized, because I'm kind of rambling all over the place. But one thing that I think is really interesting, just to kind of point out, is that so many countries are on lockdown and being encouraged to work from home, and businesses are shutting down, and it's very scary economically. But and I don't want to make a light of it, because people, not only are people losing their lives, but they're losing their jobs, and we're entering, very uncharted waters in a lot of ways. So it's a really scary moment. But something that I think will be carried away from this moment is the fact that, global pollution is down 50%. And, there was this flurry of viral memes about dolphins swimming in the Venice canals and all that. And that actually turns out to not be true. But it does turn out to be true that the Venice canals have cleared significantly, and there are new fish, species that they haven't seen in those canals for a long time. So I think that this is a tragic moment for the planet, and or for the people that live on the planet. But I do think that this will be referenced for many, many years as an example of just how quickly the Earth can begin to rebound when emissions are cut, when human activity is put on hold. And so I think the challenge going forward, because I'm a human, we're not just going to live like this for the rest of our life, going to hold up in our rooms.
Right.
So the challenge is going to be, how can we recreate this effect on the planet and still get the Earth, or still get the economy and people doing what they need to do? And I think that there's going to be so many creative solutions that come out of this, but I would not be surprised if this moment is referenced for the next 50 years as an example of how quickly the Earth can rebound, and how we can make the right decisions to allow that to happen.
So beautifully stated, Josh. I appreciate that. I mean, I think it underscores what we talk about in the humanities a lot, is that whether it's environment or science or, anything that seems technical or outside of the humanities per se, there's always an interplay,
Yeah.
because we're human beings, and we are creating and living and impacting each other and the world around us. And there's really no separation between the humanities and any particular topic. So these environmental issues are so kind of beautifully underscored when you talk about it, with regard to our role and our responsibility. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, and I think you're spot on. Yeah.
Well, so as a final thought today, since we are from Utah Humanities and trying to create these virtual campfires in light of social distancing, what would you say is a key role or a helpful role that the humanities can play in general in our current situation? What kind of role can it play in our lives, when we're going through kind of challenging times?
Well, yeah. So, I think the first thing that comes up that's very obvious is that reading books, reading plays, discovering new ideas are great to do in moments of downtime. I think a lot of people are finding themselves with extra time on their hands. Even if they're still able to work, they're not maybe having to go through kind of a morning routine the same way. So that's the obvious one, is that both to consume all these, but also to create. I think a lot of it's a chance to create text and to produce ideas. But I think that it's also important that we recognize that it's not just about entertainment, and that a lot of people are really on edge, and they're really uncertain times. And I have friends who are in the service industry that are losing their jobs, and so this isn't just kind of a fun vacation for everybody where they can read some extra books. It's a really serious situation. And so in that regard, I think the humanities have a much more serious and important role to play. And I think that's really offering us stories about how to cope with change and how to face hardship in really unpredictable times. Something that just comes to my mind is in the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary. At some point, it was 20 hours long, but at some point during all that, it was really well done. They featured a Vietnamese she was very young, like maybe 15 years old, who was running supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail to various fronts. And she kept a copy of Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bells Toll with her, because for her it provided a kind of roadmap for how to be brave and how to carry out duty amidst, the horrific scenes of war. And so that just comes to my mind as the thought of like, stories can give us, Gary Snyder talks about how books are our elders. They really can offer guidance. They can give us role models, and they can give us the tools that we need to cope with, rapid change when suddenly, literally for us, because of the earthquake, the ground is no longer stable. And so in that role, I think that the humanities go far beyond entertainment to be an absolutely essential tool that we use to recover from this.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's a great way to end this conversation with that thought that the humanities really do give us those, they shore us up in really meaningful ways when we need it most, relying on,
Definitely. And I guess I would just add to encourage people so consuming the humanities is great, but, and this kind of goes back to some of the programs that I run, but in Clemente, we always talk about how you write yourself to an idea. And I think, journaling, writing, creating stories are all a way for us to make sense of what's happening around us. And, the change is so rapid that I think it really warrants some reflection. And so, that's just kind of like my plug out there, is to, yes, consume the humanities, but create them too.
Beautiful. I think that's the perfect way to end the conversation, actually.
Cool. Yeah.
It's not to consume the humanities, but create them too.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, thank you, Deena, for starting this digital campfire. Hopefully some of what I said was coherent.
It was awesome. We had a few technical difficulties, but I think we got through a really great conversation, set of ideas. And as always, Josh, you're very articulate and just really helpful. It was a great chit chat here. I appreciate it.
Well, I agree. Thank you very much, Deena, and thank you for everything you do for Utah Humanities and keeping us connected as we're all held up in isolation.
Exactly. Working from our homes, got my slippers on.
Yep, exactly.
All right, Josh. Well, we will talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, Deena. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Cool. You too.